Picture this, a warrior in shining plate armor, the sun glinting off his polished steel. He sits astride a powerful warhorse, his family's crest emblazoned on his shield, the very image of chivalry, honor, and martial glory. This is the medieval knight of our fantasies, a hero from a storybook. Now let's shatter that fantasy. The reality was a man slowly cooking to death inside his own sweat-soaked armor. He was a warrior constantly on the verge of heat stroke, suffering from painful infected sores, and crushed by the financial burden of a war machine he could barely afford. The romantic legend of the knight is one of history's greatest lies. The truth is a far more miserable and visceral story of constant pain, crippling debt, and a high probability of dying, not from a dragon's fire, but from a simple infection inside a walking metal coffin. Before we pry open this iron prison and expose the grim reality within, if you enjoy uncovering the hidden, uncomfortable truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing. It's incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from all corners of the world, connected only by our shared curiosity about the past. What you're about to hear isn't just another tale of medieval battles. It's a story of how our romantic ideals can completely whitewash the brutal, filthy, and often pathetic reality of the past. It's a deep dive into the immense suffering required to create the image of a hero. The journey to becoming this supposed hero began not on the battlefield, but in the quiet, suffocating moments before, with the slow and agonizing process of encasing yourself in a prison of your own making. Let's set the stage. We are in the High Middle Ages, roughly the 12th to the 15th century, the golden age of the armored knight. In the rigid pyramid of the feudal system, the knight was the professional warrior class, sworn to a lord in exchange for land. His purpose was simple: to be a living, breathing weapon, the medieval equivalent of a battle tank. This role came with immense social prestige. The knight was a symbol of power, a member of the nobility who was supposed to live by a code of chivalry, protecting the weak and upholding justice. But this noble purpose was built on a foundation of profound physical misery. And that misery began every single day with the armor. The first thing you have to understand is the sheer crushing weight. A full suit of plate armor in the 15th century could weigh over 60 pounds, or about 27 kilograms. Imagine the feeling as your squires begin to dress you. The process is slow, methodical. It's not a suit you put on, it's a cage that is built around you, piece by painful piece. First comes the padded undergarment, the arming doublet or gambeson. This isn't a simple shirt, it's a thick, quilted jacket, stuffed with wool or scrap cloth, designed to absorb some of the shock from blows. The moment you put it on, you begin to feel the heat. It's stifling, claustrophobic, and this is before a single piece of metal is strapped on. Then come the plates. Imagine the cold, hard feel of the steel against your body, the greaves on your shins, the sabatons on your feet, the cuisses on your thighs. Each piece adds to the accumulating weight, pressing down on your joints, straining your back. You can feel your muscles tense, already fighting a battle against gravity. The breastplate is lowered onto your torso, and you feel your breathing constrict. The straps are pulled tight, digging into your skin. The gauntlets encase your hands, making your fingers feel clumsy and distant. You can no longer properly feel the world around you. You are becoming numb, an object. By the time the helmet is lowered over your head, you are carrying the weight of a large child, distributed across every muscle. Just standing up is an effort. Mounting your horse requires immense strength or a helping hand from a squire. And this is before you've even drawn your sword. Now add the relentless, oppressive heat. The armor was a personal greenhouse, a torture chamber designed to cook its occupant. In the summer sun of France or the Holy Land, the steel plates would become burning hot to the touch. There was almost no ventilation. Your body heat, your breath, your sweat, it was all trapped inside with you. Imagine the sensation. The air inside your helmet becomes thick and foul, tasting of metal and your own stale breath. The padded gambeson, meant to protect you, becomes your enemy, a sweat-soaked sponge that clings to your skin, making it impossible for your body to cool down. Heatstroke was not a risk. It was a constant, imminent threat. Contemporary accounts describe knights fainting in the heat before a battle even began. Many died on the battlefield without ever being touched by an enemy weapon, collapsing in the mud, literally cooked to death inside their own protective gear. But the physical torment went deeper than just weight and heat. It was an assault on your senses, a deliberate imprisonment. When the visor of your helmet was lowered, your world shrank to a pair of tiny eye slits. Your peripheral vision was gone. You could only see a narrow, terrifying slice of the chaos in front of you. Your hearing was muffled, the clang of battle and the shouts of your comrades reduced to a dull, disorienting roar inside your metal skull. The sound of your own heart pounding was often the loudest thing you could hear. You were isolated, a man trapped inside a cramped, hot and noisy cage, desperately trying to make sense of the world through a few tiny holes. And then there was the pain you never see in the movies, the chafing. 60 pounds of articulated metal and leather straps are in constant motion as you move, and it all rubs against your skin. The joints were the worst. Your armpits, your groin, the backs of your knees. Imagine the raw, burning sensation as the day wears on. The constant friction, combined with the filthy, sweat-soaked padding, would rub your skin raw. Painful rashes, open sores, and boils were a knight's constant companions. These were not glorious battle wounds, but humiliating, agonizing side effects of the very armor meant to protect you. These open sores created an even greater danger: infection. We live in a world of antibiotics and sterile bandages. A medieval knight lived in a world of unimaginable filth. His undergarments were rarely washed, and his own body, stewing in sweat and grime for hours, was a breeding ground for bacteria. A simple cut from a misaligned strap or a chafed patch of skin that broke open could become a gateway for a deadly infection. In a time before germ theory, a red, swollen, pus-filled wound was often a death sentence. The armor, your symbol of power and protection, was actively trying to kill you day in and day out through a slow, agonizing war of attrition against your own body. But the physical torment of the armor was only one half of the knight's miserable reality. The other half was a relentless, soul-crushing burden that followed him long after the armor came off, the catastrophic, crippling cost of his own existence. Imagine a weight heavier than any steel plate, the constant, gnawing anxiety of debt. The shining knight of our fantasies is a wealthy aristocrat. The reality for the vast majority of knights, especially minor ones, was a man living on the absolute brink of financial ruin, perpetually in debt for the very tools of his trade. Let's break down the insane economics of being a medieval knight. Think of it not as being a soldier, but as owning and operating a terrifically expensive, high-maintenance small business. And every single piece of equipment was a luxury item. First, let's go back to the armor. A full suit of high-quality plate armor in the 15th century, custom-fitted by a master armorer in Milan or Augsburg, was not just a piece of equipment. It was a masterpiece of engineering, the medieval equivalent of a luxury sports car. The cost was astronomical. A single suit of armor could cost more than a small farm. For a minor knight, its value could easily equal several years of income from his lands. This wasn't a purchase, it was a mortgage. And it was an asset that was constantly in need of maintenance, repair, and replacement. Imagine the feeling of seeing a large dent in your new breastplate after a tournament. That wasn't just a mark of honor, it was a devastating repair bill, a broken strap, a rusted joint. Every minor issue was a drain on your already strained finances. But the armor, as expensive as it was nothing compared to the single greatest expense in a knight's life: his warhorse. You couldn't just ride any horse into battle. You needed a destrier, a specialized, powerful stallion bred and trained for the shock and chaos of combat. These were not ordinary animals. They were highly strung, intelligent, and incredibly rare war machines, the result of generations of careful breeding. A destrier was the medieval equivalent of a modern-day battle tank. It had to be strong enough to carry a fully armored knight, brave enough to charge into a line of spears without flinching, and trained for years to respond to commands in the heat of battle. Its cost reflected that. A single warhorse could be worth more than the armor and all the knight's other possessions combined. Losing your destrier in battle was not just a tactical problem, it was a financial catastrophe. It could mean instant bankruptcy, the end of your career as a knight. For this reason, knights often went to great lengths to protect their horses, sometimes even encasing them in their own expensive armor. And you didn't just need one. A knight on campaign needed a stable of horses. He had his destrier for the moment of battle, a lighter, more comfortable horse called a palfrey for travel, and a pack animal, the sumpter horse, to carry his baggage, armor, and supplies. The cost of acquiring and feeding this stable of animals was a constant crushing burden. The costs just keep piling up. A knight could not function alone. He required a support staff, a small entourage that he had to pay, feed, and equip out of his own pocket. At a minimum, he needed at least one squire, often a young nobleman in training, who served as his personal assistant. The squire's job was a grueling one. He had to maintain the armor and weapons, care for the horses, and help his master dress for battle. He was a valet, a mechanic, and a bodyguard, all in one. He also needed a groom to care for the horses and often several other servants or men-at-arms to guard the camp and assist in combat. So, when a knight went to war, he wasn't just one man. He was the CEO of a small, mobile enterprise, and the payroll was relentless. His feudal income from his small plot of land was often barely enough to cover these immense overheads, even in peacetime. This created a profound and deeply un-chivalrous pressure. The romantic myth tells us knights fought for glory, for their lord, for God. The reality is that they often fought for something far more pressing. They fought for cold, hard cash. War was the only way for a knight to potentially turn a profit. The entire economic model of knighthood was based on the brutal reality of plunder. This is the dark secret behind the shining armor. The chivalric code, full of noble ideas about protecting the weak and showing mercy, was often a luxury that a debt-ridden knight simply could not afford. The reality of a military campaign was a desperate scramble for loot. The most prized form of loot was another nobleman. Capturing an enemy knight or lord in battle was like winning the lottery. You could ransom him back to his family for an enormous sum of money, a practice that became a central pillar of medieval warfare. The amount was often based on the captive's wealth and status. This is why you often see knights in battle trying to capture, not kill, their social equals. A dead enemy was worthless. A living one was a walking chest of gold. Imagine the feeling. You see an enemy knight, his crest identifying him as from a wealthy family, and your first thought isn't of honor or duty, but of the money that could pay off your debts for the next year. But this opportunity for profit created a grotesque class-based system of violence. While a captured nobleman might be treated with courtesy in anticipation of his ransom, the same mercy was rarely extended to the common foot soldier. A peasant with a spear wasn't worth anything, so he was often slaughtered without a second thought. And what happened when there were no nobles to capture, or when a campaign dragged on and a knight's money was running out? He turned to the other source of income. The romantic image of the knight protecting the innocent shatters against the historical reality of knights pillaging, looting, and terrorizing the very people they were sworn to protect, all to cover the crippling costs of their profession. The immense financial pressure to profit from war led the knight directly into the terrifying heart of his profession, the meat grinder of a medieval battlefield. The fantasy is a graceful duel, a dance of shining steel. The reality was a chaotic, claustrophobic, and utterly brutal slugging match, where survival often had more to do with luck than skill. Imagine the moment before a charge. You are sealed inside your helmet, your world reduced to a narrow slit. Your own breathing is a deafening roar in your ears, a hot metallic rasp. This is mixed with the constant low jangling of your own armor and the nervous, heavy snorting of your destrier beneath you. You can barely see the men to your left and right. You are profoundly alone in a crowd of steel. The command is given, a muffled shout that barely penetrates your helmet. You spur your horse, lowering your heavy lance. The ground begins to shake as hundreds of armored men and horses surge forward as one. The sound is a thunderous roar of hooves, creaking leather and shouting. A terrifying wave of steel and flesh crashing towards an enemy line, bristling with spears and sharpened stakes. This was not a clean or noble affair. The air quickly filled with a thick, choking cloud of dust kicked up by the horses, mixed with the horrifying screams of wounded men and animals. The limited vision inside your helmet turned the battlefield into a confusing, terrifying blur. An enemy could appear out of nowhere, a poleaxe swinging for your head. Your armor, while protective against the glancing blow of a sword, had critical weaknesses. A dagger could find the gap at your armpit or groin. But the greatest threats were the specialized anti-armor weapons designed with the sole purpose of crushing you and your steel shell. Weapons like the poleaxe, a brutal combination of an axe, a hammer, and a spike on a long pole, were not meant to cut, but to bludgeon. Imagine the sound of a war hammer striking a helmet next to you, a deafening bell-like clang followed by the sight of a fellow knight slumping in his saddle. The hammer wouldn't slice through the helmet, it would cave it in, causing a massive concussion or fracturing the skull beneath. The force of the impact alone, a phenomenon modern science calls blunt force trauma, could kill you without ever breaking the skin. Your own armor became the instrument of your death, transferring the kinetic energy of the blow directly into your body, rupturing organs and breaking bones. And then there were the crossbows. A heavy crossbow bolt fired by a common foot soldier could punch through most plate armor at close range. Imagine the terror of that thought, that your incredibly expensive steel shell, your symbol of nobility, could be rendered useless by a peasant from 100 yards away. You could be riding forward one moment and have a sharpened metal bolt buried in your chest the next. If you were unhorsed, the situation became even more dire. 60 pounds of armor made you clumsy and slow on your feet. If you fell onto your back, you were like an overturned turtle, struggling to get up as enemy foot soldiers, nicknamed can openers, swarmed you. They would pry at your visor with daggers, aiming for your eyes or the vulnerable gap at your throat. This was not a duel, it was a desperate, muddy scramble for survival. And what happened if you survived the battle but were wounded? This is perhaps the most terrifying part of the knight's reality. You were now at the mercy of the horrors of medieval medicine. Imagine being carried from the field, your leg shattered by a mace, or your arm pierced by an arrow still stuck in the wound. There was no anesthetic, no morphine to dull the agony. Your only relief might be a crude gulp of wine or a piece of leather to bite down on as you screamed. The field surgeon was often a barber, a man whose primary skills were cutting hair and pulling teeth. Imagine his approach, not in a sterile white coat, but in a blood-soaked apron. He would probe your wound with unwashed hands and dirty tools, completely ignorant of the existence of germs. The very concept of bacteria was centuries away. In their world, infection was not caused by microbes, but by bad air or an imbalance of the four humors. Their attempts to clean a wound were often more dangerous than the wound itself. They might wash it with wine, which had some antiseptic properties, but they might also pack it with cobwebs, animal dung, or moss, believing these had healing powers. They were literally stuffing filth into an open wound. The most common and dreaded outcome of any serious wound was infection. A simple cut could swell, turn black with gangrene, and emit a foul smell. And for this, the medieval surgeon had one primary terrifying solution: amputation. Imagine the scene. You are held down by several strong men as the surgeon approaches with a red-hot saw. The heat was not for sterilization. They didn't know what that was, but for cauterizing the wound, burning the blood vessels shut to prevent you from bleeding to death. The pain would be unimaginable, a white-hot agony that would make many men pass out or die from shock on the spot. This brutal reality exposes the ultimate truth of the knight's existence. The romantic, chivalrous hero in shining armor is a myth. This myth wasn't even widely believed in the Middle Ages. It was largely created by poets and writers of romance literature, and then supercharged by the Victorians in the 19th century, who looked back on the medieval period with a deep nostalgic longing for a lost age of honor and nobility. The truth is that the medieval knight was a professional soldier trapped in a brutal system. He was a man who endured immense physical pain inside his armor, lived under the constant threat of financial ruin, and faced a terrifyingly high chance of dying, not in a glorious charge, but days later, sweating and delirious from a festering infected wound. The story of the medieval knight is a powerful and timeless lesson. It teaches us how easily we can romanticize the past, creating beautiful fantasies to cover up brutal realities. It shows that behind the shining armor of our heroes often lies a story of profound and forgotten human suffering.